please welcome Chief Technology Officer and co-founder Armis, Nadir Israel.
Hi, everyone. Wow, this stage keeps getting bigger and bigger every year. I have the amazing challenge of both being first speaker after, I'm sure, many an conference party last night. So I hope you guys have lots of coffee post-breakfast. And the other thing, kind of looking from the back at some of the ads, is that after an ad for Wolverine, I have no idea why you guys are even listening to me or any of us. I'm Nadir Israel. I'm the CTO and co-founder of a company called Armis. And Armis, quite simply from a mission standpoint, is all about helping you manage your risk and exposure to stop attacks before they happen. That's the context, really, for everything we're going to talk about today. We're going to talk about how that is getting more difficult, unfortunately, than it's ever been before, and some actual practical pieces of advice around what to do to reshape how we do defense so that we can stand in front of the offense that's shaping up in front of us. So let's start with a little bit of just gazing into the future and thinking about what do enterprises look like 2-3 years down the line? Not 5, not 10. Very quickly, before we know it. The current Gartner estimates, as well as some of the other industry estimates, are that we're about to face a situation where the ratio between humans and non-humans within a typical company is something to the order of magnitude of 1 to 1,000. That means that if you think about a company about 1,000 people large, like Armis is today, we're looking at around 1 million different agents, or in a typical 10,000 person enterprise, 10 million. Now, this is an enormous change in how we do things. If you think about anything from communication, management, what do decisions being made within an organization like that look like? It is entirely different than how we've done things so far. And in fact, the base assumptions of an enterprise like this are vastly different than what they are today. Now, if you think about what this actually looks like, this turns enterprises to the size of a place like New York City, with all of the ramifications of this. If you think for a second what it means to manage that kind of magnitude and scale, I think the best way to look at it is actually, how do you manage things like cities? You do it from infrastructure, you do it from policy making, you do it from changing different aspects of the environment, and mostly you do it by being proactive, not by being reactive to things. It's not deterministic, it's actually more statistical than anything else. But if you think about what I said before around decision making, that's a really core piece of what we're talking about here today. Think about something going wrong in an enterprise like this. Anything, a cyber incident of course, but anything that basically fails. Tracing back what that decision-making process looks like is very, very difficult. It's not just like we're used to, I guess, today mentally, that we're giving commands to different agents. In a world like this, we're talking about hundreds, thousands of agents involved in every single decision, where humans might be just an input, if at all. Tracing back and understanding what that looks like is its own challenge, even before we get into all of the cyber challenges that are plaguing this. And if we think about infrastructure for a second, what we need to think and keep in mind as we go through this are 3 major dimensions in our heads. Assets, or essentially the underlying basic building blocks of the world. Identity, both human and non-human, and both from a perspective of understanding the environment, but also governing and controlling it. And third, decision context, which is this illustrious term that is a little bit abstract right now, but we'll talk about it a little bit more later. But these 3 pieces are the control planes that you have to work with and the attack surface that you're thinking about. So if we think a little bit about today, we're already seeing that attacks have stopped targeting just people. For a while, that was the major area, the major avenue of attack, but these days it's a lot more diversified. First of all, when we think about the attack surface itself and what is being targeted, We're looking at AI agents, obviously, both from a social engineering perspective as well as from an actual vulnerability perspective. We're looking at AI-generated code. We have ample examples of that, including this last week, unfortunately, where supply chain has become basically the same attack vector on steroids. There are so many avenues of entry that there's a lot of an attack surface there. And lastly, when it comes to guardian agents, even things that are run by security, those themselves are targets as well, because why not? Now, when we think about how this attack surface manifests, and we're still talking about today right now, we've kind of zoomed back into the present from the future, there are so many different examples of this threat model being used against AI today that honestly, every one of you probably has multiple examples in your heads of recent events and recent things that have happened. But some of the different things that are pretty prominent, model poisoning, essentially influencing model data in order to influence the results and the outcomes, evasion of logic, basically being able to input things into an existing model, but get it to expose or change its behavior, different autonomous blind spots, taking advantage of the fact that there are agentic workflows that don't require humans in the loop at all, and the fact that because models keep on learning, you can adapt and change them on the fly as well. Now, all of these in a world where you have millions and millions of these running around really bring home the point of how vast the attack surface that we have in running organization has become, and what's required of us when we're thinking about architecting the security of the future, and what does that look like as well. So let me give you, first of all, how we are today, and some of the examples of what happens today in enterprises, and then we can get into a little bit of that future. First of all, I think that from a detection gap perspective, and from a perspective of the confidence that we all have in our existing security stack, it tells a really interesting story. This is from our latest cyber warfare report that we put out just a month ago. And it shows, first of all, that broadly, when looking at all threat actors, AI-generated attacks, meaning attacks that use AI to perform the attack, to run the platform, are on a huge rise. A lot of the different attacks run by not just nation-state actors, but also criminal endeavors and everything else is using AI. That's also lowering the bar on what's required from them in order to initiate and succeed in an attack. And the second piece is, and this is pretty common, as all of you know, defenses are mostly reactive. When you think about most organizations, it is still alert pops up, human in the loop, you go about solving for whatever needs to be solving, and you do it at human speed. From a confidence standpoint, I think that the story ultimately of just what the confidence versus the actual level of vulnerability, again, tells a very ironic story for most security teams, but pretty typical for what we're seeing. Now, if we look at some of the examples, again, that are happening right now in front of us, let's take two areas that illustrate some of those attack vectors that we mentioned before. First of all, I doubt that anyone here has not heard of OpenClaw and of everything around that, not just from a perspective of what the tool is, what the platform is, in order to essentially build your own agentic bot and run it on your own hardware, your own software, but OpenClaw became an immediate overnight success that a lot of organizations started using without their knowledge. People within organizations immediately spun up bots, connected them to pretty much everything. And the nature of this is pretty simple. OpenClaw itself had many, many different vulnerabilities within its open source repository. And also, in reality, this is the opening act of how enterprises are about to look like. We've spent 2 decades segmenting networks, stopping what used to be a flat network within organizations, and now we're building the biggest flat network of all. We are connecting AI to every system, every data platform, everything to make it useful, and in reality, not just creating a complete corporate flat network, but we're connecting that network completely to the internet as well. Security teams' essentially worst nightmare when it comes to what does this look like from a security control perspective. The other thing, and this is maybe more on the agentic coding side, Armis put out a really interesting report that we're starting to do monthly a couple of weeks ago. This report does the following. It takes all of the engines that you know for coding, and it runs them on 35 different tasks that are curated based on what we see threat actors using today against AI. Once those tasks are coded, we run our own scanning on the code that results, and we tally up all of the vulnerabilities that are actively being used by threat actors and hit different models out there. The results are pretty spectacular. I can let you guys read through a little bit of who performs what, but you're more than welcome to download and view that report. The point is that not all models are created equal. Some models out there perform very, very poorly. Some models out there actually do a very decent job in creating code that is worthy and, at the very least, has a decent amount of vulnerabilities according to standards. What that means, by the way, is as a security team, you're not going to stop vibe coding from happening, but you might be able to at least influence the company to use the right one to perform the best within your environment. Going back to that city analogy and infrastructure, this is an example of policy making and infrastructure that impacts that entire city enterprise in a positive way. Now, I think that when we think about all of this attack surface, and when we think about all of these different attack vectors, we have to take into account that attackers are using AI. They are using AI to first code exploits at a speed never seen before. You know, a couple of years ago, the time to know an exploit used to be 7 to 12 days based on which intelligence agency in the world is doing it. We're down to minutes. Once a vulnerability comes out, coding an exploit for it is as easy as letting Claude or any one of the other agentic coders write it. Now, attackers are using it. Defenders are still stuck in a very reactive and very manual world. This is where we need to be. We need to be in a place where we are no longer looking at any kind of static ruling. Anything from identity privileges to monitoring the environment and reacting to it has to be at machine speed, and it has to be dynamic. It has to be intent-based. An example a CISO told me actually a while back is that, you know, even when you're at this conference and you're at a party and you're drunk, you go up to the 20th floor and you open a window, something in your brain is going to tell you not to jump, to stop yourself from doing this. Agents do not have that. They will do whatever. They will self-harm and harm the rest of the enterprise. And so the aspect of controlling them has to be dynamic by nature. It has to be continuous. And the focus has to be not about generating alerts and monitoring or about being reactive. It has to be about reducing exposure and tending to the infrastructure as much as possible and making everything fast enough. That fast enough part is one of the most important aspects of this because we, for decades, have feared machine automation. We have feared being able to give the controls over to something that can act at machine speed, and for good reason. But we're all going to have to collectively get over that because at the end of the day, we will have to react at a pace that is fast enough for the machines that are doing the attacking. When we started Armis 10 years ago, we heard CISOs start off with these series of questions. At first, it was, what do I have? I don't know what I have in my environment. How can I possibly mount a defense or do anything if I don't understand my own attack surface? Then it graduated to what's important. How do I understand, with context, what do I need to focus on? Out of the millions of vulnerabilities, what are those top 10, top 100, top 1,000 that I need to actually focus on? And then it became, obviously, how do I fix it? But that is still a very, very manual and reactive step today. I think for most vulnerability management teams, for most risk management teams, the idea of actioning and remediating and fixing something is still a very, very manual, open a ticket, let some guy look at it, approve it, go through a bunch of change management, and then perform a fix. And again, for good reason. It's just being forced on a rapid evolutionary path from where we are today as we speak. Because we're no longer looking at just humans in this. And we're no longer looking at just a singular human in this. We are looking at ultimately swarms of agents that are taking action, that are acting within the enterprise on our behalf, not just on the side of the enterprise broadly, but also on the side of security itself. And I think that ultimately the question of how do I agent, how do I scale, how do I create something that can truly be resilient on its own becomes a very, very important question for all of us to think about. We have to graduate in our thinking from looking at this as a fight between humans and humans and the ability to have things like defense in depth and to monitor and detect and to ultimately be able to react to things as they happen, to understanding that this is absolutely an AI versus AI world. And unfortunately, the offense AI is absolutely already there. It's the defensive part that we're still getting around and still understanding. We have crossed a very, very important threshold here, and the speed and scale and the autonomy of decision-making that's required is far beyond how we look at things today. So, in practical terms, what does winning this actually look like? First of all, we have to move from reactive detection to adaptive offense. What I mean by that is that that entire infrastructure we talked about before has to all sing together for one thing, and that is allowing rapid action and allowing a thought from reactive to proactive. We have to look at exposure management not just as a buzzword of the day that a bunch of companies are using, but think about what it actually means. Closing gaps, stopping attacks before they happen and not during, are all imperative. Being able to manage ultimately a wide scale of different vulnerabilities and issues is imperative. The good news is that a defender AI actually has a lot of advantages over an offensive AI. It has home court advantage. It understands ultimately where the weaknesses actually are, and it can target and prioritize things based on that. Unified and comprehensive platforms are something that over the last couple of years have been happening on their own already. And I think that we've been doing collectively a fairly good job at trying to understand how all of that needs to look like. But this is going nuclear, really. I think that at the end of the day, we're not going to have the privilege of having disconnected tools the way that we do today. And lastly, I think that when we look at, again, the manual response towards autonomous action, that's where us as an industry entirely need to move to. So, in practical terms, what does that look like? First of all, continuous learning. Again, we feared this. We feared the action, we feared the learning, we feared allowing AI ultimately into this mix of things, but we can't. At the end of the day, to be able to work through and put up a proper defense, we have to. Secondly, attackers ultimately rely on everything that we leave exposed. All of the shadow stuff, all of the things that are unmanaged, all of the things that are blind spots for us. Now, we used to rely on the fact that, blind spots for us might be an entry point for someone, but they need to know about it. I think that where we stand today, that is something that is a thing of the past. An attacker AI platform can rattle all defenses at once. It can leverage social engineering on the security team itself as it does it, and it can figure out all of these unmanaged things on its own. So being able to run an effective program that understands all of the environment and takes advantage of that in defending is no longer a luxury or optional, it's a must. And lastly, we have to move past recommendations. I think that every tool on the planet in security today has a cute little chatbot and agent that goes and gives you recommendations based on whatever it is that's showing up on screen. We have to move past that. I think that at the end of the day, standing here a year from now, my personal projection is that this is going to be so table stakes and so obvious that there will be no need to talk about it anymore. But the reality is, between now and the next conference, we have a lot of work to do. I think that we stand at such an important point of history when it comes to reshaping how this battlefield looks like. And it's reshaping on us already from an offensive standpoint. It's up to us to go and reshape how we do defense, and we need to do it fast enough so that we're not caught completely off guard. Thank you very, very much, everyone. I hope you enjoy the rest of the conference.